Okay, so to start off, since you guys need to submit your Citi training certificate soon, I assume basically everyone in the class has taken Citi training since you all went through 293. So if you have done that already, you can literally just find your previous Citi training certificate and submit it here for 5 points. If you have not taken Citi training, just visit this instructional page in the week 1 module, and it'll walk you through everything that you need to do. Basically, you'll just log into the Miami University Citi training page. It's just an online ethics training if you want to do human subjects-based research, which we are going to do. You're going to register with your own Miami credentials, select human subjects IRB basic course, and then you'll just walk through a series of modules. It's just readings about human research ethics and some quizzes. All in all, if you've never taken Citi training before, I would make sure to dedicate like at least a couple hours to it. But then after that, you're done and you can reuse that certificate for, I believe, up to 5 years. So if you haven't taken it, just visit this page and you should be able to go from there. So that should do it for Citi training. Now, before talking about the worksheet, I did want to talk a little bit more about your project. So the reason I wanted to talk a little bit about the project today is that now that everyone has submitted their quiz indicating project preferences, including whether you'd like to work as an individual, whether you'd like to work in a group, and how you'd like to be formed into a group, and what your interests are, I'm going to be forming those groups today. So what I'm going to be doing is reaching out to every student in the class by email. Any students who elected to be individually, I'll just be reaching out to you individually to chat a little bit. Anyone who indicated that they want to be put in a group, I'm going to spend some time looking through your answers and forming you into a group that meshes as best as I see possible based on your responses. So to the extent that I can, I try and group people who have indicated at least one similar research interest, as well as at least some overlapping available meeting time. This obviously can't happen perfectly because everyone has disparate schedules, particularly over the summer. There's people that work full time, there's people that take other classes. So I really just try my best to take your preferences into account. So if you've got a friend in the class that you want to work with, absolutely fine, let me know. If there's someone who lives in the same state or country as you do and you know it'll be a lot easier to coordinate meeting times, absolutely fine, just let me know. If you want me to just do my best with the preferences and the times that you indicated, I'll do that. Basically, I'm just going to try my best. When I reach out to groups to give you a spiel about how I formed your group, I will be CCing everyone so that you know who all is in your group, so you have everybody's emails and you've all been introduced at least over email. And then from there, I encourage you guys to start chatting basically as soon as you can. So you've got this research project proposal available to you that I encourage you to read today or tomorrow. If you've taken 293 with me before, the language of this proposal instructions document is hopefully a bit similar. The key differences is that we're shifting from a correlational study to an experimental study. But the first thing you need to do is similar to when you designed a correlational study, which is identify a couple variables that you think might be related to one another. So talk about your similar interest and try and hash out which variables you're interested in. The next step, if you're going the experimental route, is to ask yourself, which is the variable that might be able to cause changes to a second variable? So you're probably familiar with the language of an IV versus a DV, right? Identify your IV, the one that can cause changes, and the DV, the one that's the outcome. You don't have to pay too much attention to this part, the enabling a 2x2 analysis. Basically, you're all going to include some demographics in your survey, like I always have students do. So gender, class year, some categorical variable that will enable us to look at a second IV and potential interactions. So as long as you make sure to just think about some demographics that you think might be relevant, that's all you need to do for that part. And the same structure of the proposal document. And then here's my giant list of hypothetical variables. So this is the same massive list of pre-published scales of variables that I've used for your correlational study. So a key thing to keep in mind if you're perusing this list is that none of these are the manipulations themselves. These are all scales on, you know, like 1 to 7, agree to disagree. So basically, any of these variables would be fair game for your IV or your DV, but the actual link and the published scale you would find there would only be workable for the DV. And IV in this case is going to need to be manipulated. So if you say to yourself, well, I think self-esteem might cause changes to anxiety, how do I manipulate self-esteem? That'll be the key piece where you're going to start needing to brainstorm. And I encourage you to be in touch with me. Obviously, you can do some background literature reviews because self-esteem manipulations exist out there. If I had one recommendation for how you can start cogitating on creating manipulations, the number one easiest way to manipulate a variable is to ask participants to reflect and to think of a memory. So for example, you're like, how do I manipulate self-esteem? Do I call people, some of my participants stupid and I call the rest of them smart? No, we want to be maybe a little bit more subtle than that. So maybe have half of your participants reflect on a time when they felt really socially confident or they were very successful at something that mattered to them. And your control participants will reflect on like a neutral control topic. That's the key to start thinking of manipulation, right? Then participants can be randomly assigned to the self-esteem condition or the control condition. And then from there, does the self-esteem group have lower anxiety? So on and so forth. So that's my main piece of advice. If you're starting to think like, how do I manipulate anything? Having people reflect on a memory is my number one way to create an easy manipulation. Oh, I want to manipulate political beliefs. So have some participants reflect on their political beliefs and the other half can reflect on a neutral topic. That's it. That's the easiest way to make a manipulation, cut and dry. Plenty of variables out there have manipulations that have been pre-published, so you can certainly go out looking for them, looking for experimental research on such a variable. But again, if we're developing manipulations from scratch, feel free to ask for my advice, but it's not as hard as it sounds. Just make participants think a little bit about a memory. Everyone has memories of probably any variable on this list and how it applies to them in some capacity. But if you're still confused, definitely let me know. So then once I reach out to the groups, today I would again recommend being in touch with your group mates, or if you're an individual, just start thinking sort of as soon as you can, because I've set aside some time. By set aside time, I mean it's on the syllabus. I mean, time is arbitrary, let's be honest. This is all happening at no specific class time. But in theory, I've set aside some work time to work in your proposal. So I'll be posting ethics and animal research lecture materials, but for any work you have to do beyond just checking out what I post, definitely try and spend some time, either Friday or definitely Monday at the latest, working on this proposal, either individually or in your project groups. So that's why I'm going to make sure to get those project formation emails out today so you know who you have to start chatting with. Does anyone here at this point have any questions on the project proposal, group formation, or anything project related before I jump over to the worksheet? Finally cleaned up my desktop yesterday. Doesn't it look so elegant? Got the screensaver that was there on this dumb psych department PC. Okay, so if nobody has any questions, obviously feel free to ask questions later. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the worksheet that will be due tonight. So I do have a quote unquote lecture, and I've posted some slides for this topic of finding and reading research. If you've been in my 293 sections for the past few semesters, I talked about finding research and strategies for finding research and strategies for reading research articles. So if you're familiar with those materials, you can pretty much just skim and review them before doing this worksheet. But definitely make sure to, even if you're familiar with that lecture content, to read this worksheet carefully because it's just a little bit different. It's a little bit tweaked from the ones you've seen before. But I will be re-recording a lecture for finding and reading research strategies to go along with those slides that I've posted. Okay, so for this particular worksheet, it's combined finding and reading research. So what you're going to do is a little bit different because you're going to Once you've found a research topic you're interested in, is you're going to work a little bit more extensively with it than you did in any one of the single old Finding and Reading research articles. One thing that's new is you want to locate a background research using any of the non-psych info search strategies I've mentioned, and just to link it. If you recall that lecture, basically I talk about how you can find any number of non-academic sources, or even academic sources just from other places, by looking at government websites, by looking at mainstream newspapers or online periodicals like The Atlantic. So just to give you a quick example, I recommended governmental agencies that are focused on research and science. So either the National Science Foundation or like the National Institute of Health. A super easy way to find a source using any of the non-database strategies I mentioned is just go to a source and use their search bar. Let's say I'm still interested in self-esteem. I can just go here, and they've got a whole ton of resources on self-esteem. Somewhere on the NIH website, there's like an A to Z search page where you could just find self-esteem, and there's a whole bunch of like quick guides. So basically just use any of the other sort of internet search strategies that I mentioned to locate some other source, just to kind of diversify your source finding. So then onto the finding PsycInfo source part. Again, this is likely familiar to anyone who's had this worksheet in a previous instantiation. Because I want to make sure you've all practiced the skill. I don't know who's making noise, so I'm just going to mute everybody. So I want to make sure that you can find different kinds of papers. So basically, I want to have you find a literature review, an empirical study, and then another sort of miscellaneous qualitative or longitudinal. This is valuable to do because we're going to talk a lot more about writing for research this semester, and you're going to be writing up a brief literature review as the introduction to your project paper. So to figure out what is a literature review, a good step to take is to find one and to eyeball it. So it's really easy to find different sources of these different paper types on PsycInfo. So I'll pop over to PsycInfo real quick and show you what I mean. First off, just because I know this is something people are constantly doing wrong and they're losing points on this worksheet when they don't have to, do not go to this one, and do not go to the APA website. I don't know why people are always doing that. I'm really unsure where the misconception comes in, but it's this. This is the psych database you want to use, PsycInfo, EBSCOhost, so use this one. Other databases are perfectly fine in general, but for this particular activity, I want to make sure you have some PsycInfo skills, because PsycInfo is probably the best psychology-based database. Okay, you'll just log in with your Miami credentials, and then this is your basic PsycInfo toolbar. You don't need to change anything. Just go ahead and start your searching. You're interested in self-esteem. Okay. Like, oh my God, there's like 52,000, just a gazillion hits, whatever. You obviously want to have some working capacity at like limiting your search down by being like self-esteem and anxiety or whatever. But for this particular assignment, you can really more so focus on finding these different paper types. So I mentioned that you want to find a literature review. Easy way to do that is you just go to methodology and you specifically say you just want literature reviews. Okay, so the difference between a literature review and any other sort of paper you'd find on PsycInfo is that a literature review is a systematic overview and synthesis of a pre-existing body of research. So any literature review on self-esteem is going to condense a whole bunch of research on self-esteem. So reading literature reviews to get acquainted with a topic is very, very wise, because as opposed to having to read thousands of empirical articles, you can read a handful of literature reviews and become quite well acquainted with the topic. So I want to make sure you know how to find literature reviews. The other ones I indicated, find an empirical study. It's the same thing. It's in this methodology tab. Just want to go back. Actually, you might need to clear. You can clear any modifiers you've made just up there. So then I can go back to methodology and now empirical studies. Okay, and then you can just pick one. There's a lot, so just skim maybe the first few pages and find one that you think sounds neat. Then for this last one, find a quantitative, qualitative, or longitudinal study. Again, it'll just be going to methodology and selecting those three, and then just finding one that, again, you think sounds kind of neat. So then to complete this second half of the reading research, again, if you've seen my reading research lecture materials before, you know that I really like this template that I found from this linked article here. I think it's a great way to organize your thoughts and your note taking when you're trying to read an article, just by getting you to distill out key details and not worrying about reading it start to finish. So it makes your life a little bit easier. So basically just choose one of the articles you found from up here in the psych info section and take a few notes on it. And that'll be the worksheet. So that basically does it for covering the worksheet. Again, if you want to review those lecture materials as a bit of a review, of course, I encourage you to do so. I'll be recording my audio lecture to go along with it later this afternoon once I get caught up with the science and research lecture materials. But other than that, hopefully the worksheet is pretty straightforward. But if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. So at this point, I'm going to end the recording, and I'm just going to hang out in the Zoom until everyone is gone, just in case anyone has any